Yesterday, as I spent several hours driving in my car, I listened to a number of podcasts, and one of them was a Rob Gray podcast, Perception Action podcast. One of the things that he was talking about was risk homeostasis. And so he was talking about it from the perspective of driving and the risks that drivers are willing to take, and how the risks match up with one's perception of risks, and also how implementing safety features will tend to increase the risks that drivers will take because they feel safer. So if you widen the lanes, for instance, drivers will tend to drive faster because it appears or it feels safer with the wider lanes. And so the basic idea is that we all have some level of risk that we're willing to take, and as long as the activity that we're involved in is below that risk, then we'll make riskier choices. So if we view something as safe, then we're likely to take riskier choices. If we view something as being unsafe, then we're likely to take less risky choices. And as he was talking about in terms of driving, I started to think about it in terms of the passes that we'll make or the plays that we'll make in basketball, especially a guard position, a point guard position, playmaking, etc. And so it's one of the things that I think I had a student in my class last week talk about the problem with turnovers in games. And so I clicked on who were the players that had the most turnovers in the NBA this year, and almost everyone that is in the top 10 in turnovers per game would be a high level player. The reason they commit a lot of turnovers, they have the ball a lot. They try to make a lot of plays. And so typically we think of turnovers as a negative, and we think of players who make a lot of turnovers as being having a negative impact on the team. But we have to take into account how often they have the ball and how often they're trying to make plays. If I'm constantly driving into the lane and trying to create shots for my teammates, I'm more likely to have more turnovers than the player who stands at the three-point line and catches and shoots every single time. Now, does that mean that I'm a worse player because I have more turnovers? Probably not. Does that mean that the other player doesn't have value just because he stands at the three-point line? No. Different roles, and with different roles come different expectations. In terms of the risk homeostasis, I think there are some players who play a point guard position or a playmaking position very tentatively. And to me, this probably comes a little bit from their personality, but then also, from the coach and the coach's behavior and the coach's feedback to players. So I've seen this. I've had players, who I've worked with, and one player in particular, his dad would complain to me that his son was kind of the backup point guard. And he didn't understand it because the starting point guard would go into games and commit a lot of turnovers, but the coach never took him out, and his son would go in and would hardly ever commit a turnover, but he still wasn't increasing his playing time. The one who was more actively involved was the one who was playing more. And obviously there's a lot of variables in play, especially a father looking at it from his perspective, with his own son, not necessarily an unbiased perspective. But in a lot of ways, the player who may or may not have been committing all of these turnovers may have also been creating a number of positive plays for the team as well. And this is one thing that goes along. And so it depends on what the coach is looking for, and then also how the player behaves in relation to the coach's expectations. So if a coach gives players a lot of freedom, and encourages them to make plays, the risk avoidance for those players will likely go down. They'll probably take more risks. When a coach punishes mistakes or takes players out if they commit turnovers, that risk avoidance is going to go up, and they're not going to make as many plays because they're going to be scared to make the mistake. And so this kind of fluctuates from coach to coach, from player to player. Oftentimes it will fluctuate within a team, and I think part of that goes back to the self-fulfilling prophecy with coaches, as they see the player they perceive to be their best player. If he commits a turnover, it's something that it just happens. If a player off the bench who's not considered to be one of the better players commits a turnover, kind of proves that that's why that player is on the bench. and the perception of it changes, based on the coach's perception of those players, which in a lot of cases is unfair and may have been something that the father was reacting to with the player, from my example. So all these things go into play when we're thinking about turnovers, mistakes, playing time, and how players play on the court. The players with the more freedom, the players with the more supportive coaches, more positive coaching, are probably going to play with a riskier style or take more chances, which could lead to more turnovers, but it's probably going to lead to more positive plays as well. Because if I never penetrate into the middle of the key and collapse a defense, it becomes harder for my team to score. But if I can penetrate in every single possession, I can create easy baskets, but I'm probably going to make a mistake here and there too. So, it's the good with the bad. And so you look at somebody like Russell Westbrook, who I think was first or second in the league this year in turnovers, with about 3.5 per game. But he also scored 20 plus points per game and 12 plus assists per game. Are you willing to accept those 3 turnovers a game to get the output that he provides? I think most coaches would take that, take that risk that he plays with, always constantly trying to make plays and playing without fear. I think most coaches would accept that risk. So again, it's no easy answer, and it changes from situation to situation, but it's definitely something to be aware of as a player and as a coach, is how is your feedback or your behaviors being interpreted by players or used by players, maybe restricting or constraining players, or potentially promoting players to really play with freedom, which is going to lead to some mistakes, but also will lead to those positive plays. So there has to be some kind of balance from a coach to a player in terms of making sure that the player is not playing with too much risk and constantly trying to make the home run play instead of the simple play, but also needs to have the confidence to play through mistakes and be willing to make those plays to become a better player. So there's got to be some middle ground, and that's where the coaches and players have to work together, find that middle ground and find that acceptable risk between making plays and the potential for turnovers or mistakes.